Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. We would like to thank you for joining us for our first annual investment meeting webinar. My name is Isa Lois, and I will be your host for today. Annual Investment Meeting is the largest investment platform in the world, an initiative of the UAE Ministry of Economy. AIM has been promoting a healthier global economy by linking investments opportunities to fast-growing economies under five pillars: foreign direct investment, foreign portfolio investment, small and medium enterprise, startups, and future cities. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll bring them up after presentation. During the webinar, we'll be running live polls located beside the question tab to get you engaged. Today, we are presenting a new reality sustainable FDI strategies. With a background of direct investment and special economic zones advisory, Ms. Zoe Harris offers combined FDI and sustainability advisory, supporting companies and special economic zones to develop commercial strategies and scale sustainable supply chain. Without further ado, we will turn the time over to our speaker, Ms. Zoe Harris. Please come on stage.
Thank you very much, Isa. It's my pleasure and delight to be part of this webinar today, this great initiative by the Annual Investment Meeting. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to discuss a new reality in sustainable FDI strategies. So first of all, I'd like to introduce to you my company called Impact Zones. We offer combined commercial sustainability strategy advisory, supporting companies to scale sustainable supply chains. We work with governments and special economic zones to enhance their locations' competitiveness, driving sustainable growth and global value chains. We also provide training and workshops for FDI and SEZ executives. Based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, we work with a global network of consultants. Our services include sustainable trade and investment strategies, special economic zones, eco-industrial parks development, location marketing and branding, and FDI training. We work closely with the following partners. First of all, Annual Investment Meeting. We're proud to be a knowledge partner of AIM. We work together with Vessel Global as a partner in market entry services and trade and FDI advisory. Our new partner, SANEC, Southern African Netherlands Chamber of Commerce, we work closely with to serve our sub-Saharan clients. We're on the consultative board of FORMOSA, Global Association of Special Economic Zones. And for trade and export promotion activities, we partner with Columda, and all our activities are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals as set out by the UN. We share the vision of UN Global Compact with regards to 2030, achieving the SDGs, so to mobilize a global movement of sustainable companies and stakeholders to create the world we want. So therefore, our mission is to mobilize governments, the private sector, and align with multilateral organizations to make a global economic, social, and environmental impact. We provide leadership programs, raising awareness on the SDGs and how to achieve them, inspiring governments and the business community to join us on this mission. So talking about a new reality, Einstein has a famous quote stating, "We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them," which is very relevant to these times. So I'd like to share with you this video as published by The Economist last week about COVID-19 and how bad will it be for the economy.
Around the world, economies are crumbling. Since the coronavirus outbreak, the price of every vital commodity has fallen.
We're seeing a lot of these markets hit.
Coronavirus has oil below $50 a barrel. U.S. demand in China has dropped off substantially.
You're impacting the demand for copper, iron ore, even gold is going down.
America's Department of Labor has recorded the highest ever number of new unemployment claims in the past 2 weeks, just under 10 million.
Governments had modelled the impact of a pandemic on their economies, but were in no way prepared. The indication is that economic activity has been sledgehammered in the course of a couple of weeks.
Just how deep is the crisis for the world economy? Over the past 2 months, the world's biggest stock markets have turned red.
It falls like that because investors suddenly have to recalculate the future for the economy and the future for corporate profits and adjust their figures sharply downwards. And then they tend to sell assets which are the most liquid. Often those are the big companies in the S&P 500. The S&P 500 had its quickest bear market decline in history.
When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, it took almost 2 years for the S&P 500 to drop by 49%. The 2007 to 2009 financial crisis led to a fall of almost 60% in just over a year. The coronavirus pandemic has already seen the market fall by a third in just 1 month.
This crash has been so quick because it was such a shock. In the financial crisis, there was actually quite a long lead up. It was a good long 18 months of bad news. But this is genuinely a deus ex machina, a bolt from the blue, where investors were just not pricing in the risk of a pandemic. And of course, governments have never in the past imposed the kind of lockdown on a global economy that they have this time. So this was not something people had in their models.
In an effort to stop the deadly virus, businesses have been forced to close and citizens isolated at home on an unprecedented scale worldwide. It's caused a unique economic crisis, the impact of which will be greater on some industries in particular.
The industries which are hit hardest are those which are related to the consumer. So that's retailing, that's entertainment, that's hospitality, both hotels and restaurants, many of which have simply been locked down. And many of these companies will have high costs, which they'll need to keep meeting. So suddenly you have lots of costs continuing and absolutely no revenues, which is the worst possible outcome for these businesses.
But even if a business isn't directly losing out from people staying at home, lockdowns are having a devastating ripple effect. Modern industry relies on goods and materials crossing borders. When they can't, production around the world is endangered. The coronavirus caused a break in the biggest link in this vast global supply chain.
The problem started in China, where the disease started really to be seen in December and then had a huge impact in January. And China is the bedrock of the global supply chain. Businesses started to look for alternative suppliers, but of course that was a race to try and find the few that had spare capacity.
As the virus spread, alternative suppliers have become fewer and further between.
It's going to take a very, very long time for them to rebuild their supply chains. And in the interim, because there's very little demand for finished products, few companies are going to want to resurrect that supply chain instantly until they know that the economy has settled down.
The true extent of the damage to the world economy will only start to become clear with the speed and strength of its recovery.
The big question that economists are still trying to grapple with is whether this is what they call a V-shaped recession or a U-shaped recession or an L-shaped recession.
In a V-shaped recession, the economy suffers a rapid fall but rebounds very quickly, as opposed to a longer economic trough before recovery, or long-term recession.
Now, the most encouraging news we've had so far is that in China, which was the first economy to be hit, and the latest figures suggest the most hopeful possibility, which is that this is a V-shaped recession. Now, if China can do that, the hope is that Europe and America can do that later on when the lockdowns are lifted.
Europeans and Americans are also being helped by unprecedented government responses.
Hasta 200.000 millones de euros.
£330 billion.
$2.2 trillion in urgently needed relief.
These short-term protections might reduce the damage the economy suffers, but this pandemic could last a long time.
So the difficult calculation for governments is trading off the lives of people who will die from the coronavirus versus the economic damage to the economy.
Year-long lockdowns would cost America and the Eurozone perhaps a third of their GDP. Models looking at America suggest that ending lockdowns would lessen that damage, but would lead to around 1 million extra deaths.
In the last 75 years since the Second World War, we've seen nothing like this. Governments have not reacted on this scale. So, although it's terrible, in a way it shows our humanity that we want to reduce the number of deaths so much that we're willing to put up with all these restrictions and we're willing to accept a big hit to economic activities. I'm Philip Coggan. I'm reporting for The Economist on the financial crisis that's been created by the pandemic. If you want to read more, click on the link opposite. And thank you for watching.
So here we can see the impact COVID-19 currently is having on the world global economy. And the question we now face is, okay, we're now here in the midst of COVID-19. We are going to enter into a new reality, but what is the journey going to look like? So I've mapped out a scenario, which you can see here, that we're going to be surfing 3 waves. It's a possible scenario. Obviously, everything is constantly changing, but we do need to map out a scenario to base our sustainable FDI strategy on. So right now we're in the nothing but COVID update. We're being bombarded by news every day. There are new updates, new lockdowns, new implications, facing new challenges as organizations, as people, as individuals. So this started in March, and it's, well, in the Western world at least. It started earlier in China, of course, and this is now carrying on in April with the lockdowns. They've all been extended until the end of April, expecting some more extensions to follow. From the second wave, which we could surf, will be a transition into the new normal. And the second wave, we hope to see starting in May 2020, when so in about a month's time, when when we're flattening the curve, the COVID-19 curve, which will, the transitional period we could see as another 8 to 9 months, ending in February 2021, entering into the new normal, say, second quarter of 2021. Which brings us to a poll, which we'd like to invite you to take part in. We're very interested to know whether you agree that we will see recovery either in Q3 2020, Q4 2020, or 2021. So if you go to the right top hand of your screen, tap the polls tab. You can share your anticipation, your expected recovery period. And we would be very interested for you to share with us your feedback and insights. I'm not sure if this is working right now because I'm not seeing any outcomes of the poll. There we have the outcomes. So 20% of the audience agree that we will see recovery in Q3 2020, 45%, so almost half are expecting a recovery in the fourth quarter, the last quarter of 2020, and just over a third of participants expect to see recovery in 2021, apologies. So this is fairly optimistic. I'd say almost half now is leaning towards the fourth quarter of 2020, in which we will enter into a new normal. Thank you so much for taking part in this. So, bringing us to back to the V-shaped recession, which was mentioned during the video. There are different forms of recession, like the financial crisis, which we saw in 2008. There was like a lead up of about 18 months for that crisis to happen. So there you will see more of a U-shaped recession. So in this case, we've seen an incredibly rapid fall of the economy, like instant, like free fall down. And this usually is paired with a quick recovery, which we're already seeing signs of in China. So let's hope that China precedes the US and Europe and the rest of the world in this quick recovery. So in anticipation of a possible V-shaped scenario, we need to build an agile strategy. Before we go into strategy development, I would like to share with you two recent updates on foreign investment, which I think are relevant to share before we start strategizing. First of all, an investment policy monitor update from UNCTAD published last week on COVID-19 and the implications and trends. So the latest update shows that FDI has decreased by 40%. Countries are quickly adopting liberalization measures. So removing barriers for foreign direct investment. New policy is being facilitated to promote investment. You can see increased screening of foreign investment for national security reasons. There's also an increase of bilateral investment agreements taking effect. There are important developments relating to investment policy making, and we have seen that high-level investment meetings and conferences have been cancelled. The latest update from the World Bank, they've published an outline of the current investment climate, highlights with regards to policy responses to COVID-19. So we see measures being taken to provide fiscal and financial stimulus, but also complementary investment climate policies and programs. FDI is the largest source of external finance for developing countries. So, and global inflows are expected to fall more than during the 2008 global financial crisis, which is considerable. The FDI flows are, well, the regions most exposed to decreased FDI flows are the MENA region and sub-Saharan region. And efforts in current crisis situations should focus on retention of existing foreign investors and preservation of supply chains connecting foreign and domestic suppliers. So what we are seeing is governments, they need to support businesses in repurposing their production lines. So here on the right, you see production of protective masks in China. We need to reinforce anti-cartel measures, so making sure the prices don't drop down too low. And what is absolutely crucial is to continue the dialogue with the private sector and act with speed. So from a policymaker and government perspective. So if we're looking at supply chains, looking at the supply and the demand side of the effects of COVID-19, from the supply side, we see that there's a shortage in availability and level of skills from the labor force. There's a lower worker productivity for all kinds of reasons. whether it's psychological or workers not being able to reach the production unit, especially in the lower skilled workforce. There's also reduced access to raw and immediate inputs. So because of disrupted value chains, supply chains. So the availability of inputs, raw materials, resources. On the demand side, we see there's a negative impact on related sectors due to decreased consumption and low demand from upstream value firms. However, there's a positive impact on essential and emergency goods, so like protective clothing for COVID-19, medical supplies, medical devices, as well as online services, with everyone having to communicate through the internet. And we are also seeing changing consumption patterns, obviously clothing, hairdresser, especially, and last but not least, the tourism industry and aviation. So I'd like to share with you a video clip by Amina Mohammed. She's UN Deputy Secretary General, on what kind of leadership we are looking for within this crisis, underpinning the need for partnerships and collaborations, and focusing on supply chains and connectivity.
And have an opportunity to work at distance from being infected by the COVID-19. So providing safe working conditions. Secondly, to make sure that your global supply chain or your suppliers are also being taken care of. Many of these might be small or medium-sized companies that get into trouble in times like these. So there are many good examples how companies are making sure to maintain their global supply chain, are making sure to pay suppliers in advance and not dragging out the payments, and doing different things to make sure that the supply chain is being kept active.
We've lost your sound for a moment, Lisa. Sound there. We seem to have lost your sound. Lisa, we've lost your sound, I think. I'm going to turn to the Deputy Secretary General. Amina, the Secretary General's called for governments, business, civil society to work together to support the UN's efforts. How can the private sector support the UN in this time of crisis?
Well, thanks, Dan. First, let me thank Unilever, because the engagement you had with two of our agencies to see how collaborating brings a product into what already is in a supply chain was very important, and soap was just that. And the more creative and imaginative we can be, thinking about walking through what we say in our communities, and those supply chains are incredibly important. Where Unilever goods go or other goods go from other companies, sometimes government doesn't go and assistance doesn't get there. So I think the first thing is that let's actually map out where is business and where does it go, and how can we join that and make sure that we get further to people who need it most. The UN, first and foremost, the new way of working is creating its own challenges. By taking people out of the workplace and saying we work from home means that we need connectivity. Now within the UN, in our country teams across over 130 countries, we're doing that really well. And we are taking care of our staff. Now, how do we engage with business, with government, with NGOs? I think those platforms need to be created really quickly. Those virtual engagement spaces, if you would, and to do it country by country, and we're working with the UN Global Compact to see how we can do that. But that could be something that business could help us set up really quickly. It's about connectivity, and it's much it would be much appreciated. There's nothing worse than not being able to communicate with these great ideas and how we can solve these problems with the urgency which they require. I think that there needs to be a pushback from countries that are closing down the supply chains, looking inwards, and that is going to be incredibly difficult, and it is going to deepen the crisis that we see in continents and regions where over 80–90% of their imports on the medical supplies exist with a dependency on that global trade and those supply chains. Companies need to say to governments, this is not right, and it will not work. And I think the principles that we talk about, and when we talk about human rights, this is a global issue that needs a global response. And so hearing businesses' voices in trying to say, no, we will reestablish those supply chains. We will start to produce. I was really amazed this morning to hear one company that was producing the medical supplies for drips had now moved to sanitizers, had moved into other spaces where they had not expected to, but they saw the demand and they were upfront and trying to do that. It is important that we involve young people. They are the most creative, most connected, and give them the problem. They will resolve it really quickly. We have many entrepreneurs, and it is here a shout out for Southeast Asia, India, Africa. They're not waiting with a begging bowl. There are many people who are getting up and doing things. Hospitals are going up in stadiums all over Africa. It started there before it started here. So I think a little bit of respect and collaboration and co-creation around what needs to be done between businesses around the world and bringing them together. The UN, as I said, the platforms that we have in the country is an incredibly strong footprint of all our agencies, and we're willing to continue to connect, to convene, and to make this work in the collaborative way that it needs to be done. In the next week or so, you will see from the SG's report the framework in which we are developing to do that. It needs a structure. What is new? It's not just the UN. Business is being called upon. Government is in there at all different levels, especially the local level, because that's where the communities are, particularly those that I'm talking to you about that are out of the formal sector, so you don't even see them. But they are the glue for many of these societies. Communities that, when you talk about isolation, they live in compounds where they are many in number. So, as we say the things we do, we need to really reflect on what that means in practical terms for countries that perhaps can't shut down immediately, but could do the social distancing, could have different delivery mechanisms for goods and services, and in the meantime, make sure these collaborations ensure that we are better off down the road than we are now.
So bringing us to the next poll, following Amina Mohammed's video. So we would like to invite you to participate in our second poll, answering the questions, what should IPAs focus on now? So engaging with existing investors, or developing an agile investor attraction strategy, or doing both? Very interesting. I see about 2/3 answering both, and about 15% voting for engaging with existing investors, and 15% developing agile investor attraction strategy. So continuing on this, yes. I would say the right answer is focusing on both. First of all, we have to focus on investor retention. So really taking good care of our existing investors, focusing on aftercare. How can we help our current investors? engaging with them, providing them with any support which is needed with regards to information on incentives available from the governments with the changes in policy which are happening, new bilateral investment agreements which are taking effect. For example, looking at creative solutions, how to collaborate. I'll have an example of that shortly. What are best practices? And mostly facilitating collaborations and partnerships with stakeholders. So working very closely together with the free trade zones or special economic zones, the industry associations, chambers of commerce, and any other relevant stakeholders, and also connecting with possible financing sources. So looking at development finance available, as well as private finance, impact investment. So we'll continue on that shortly. I would like to share with you a corporate perspective in this short video coming up with Alan Job, the CEO of Unilever, to set an example of what kind of leadership and agility is needed right now from a corporate perspective for IPAs to gain insight in how to support in this effort. So I invite you to watch this video with me.
So our kind of framework on dealing of our whole response to this situation is what can we do to save lives and what can we do to protect livelihoods, and some extra payment terms, paying our small suppliers quickly is a small thing we can do that might help.
Well, thank you. We are here to talk about leadership as well. I mean, what do you think some of the key competencies are that leaders need to lead their businesses, their small businesses, their governments, their communities through this time of crisis?
Is that for me, Dan?
Yeah, Alan.
Well, as you would expect, we've got a handy-dandy framework on leadership competencies that we expect from leaders in Unilever. I can tell you, chief execs are expected to be proficient in things like strategy and systems thinking. At the moment, I'm getting very tactical. I'm living in the here and now. I'm trying to make the complex simple, give my teams clear principles to adhere to, and go for speed and decision making. But at the end of the day, contrary to often how it's portrayed, the chief exec is furthest away from the action on the front line, and we have to rely on our frontline leaders and team members. Our structure of thinking about leadership is a very progressive one, I think, and we talk about you have to master your inner game before you can master your outer game. And this extraordinary uncertainty that we're dealing with at the moment is testing two dimensions of our inner game. The first is personal mastery. So anything you can do to remain centered, anything you can do to remain calm, not giving up on personal health and well-being. We're putting a particular emphasis on that. And the second is agility. We're finding that we're doing things in an order of magnitude faster than we ordinarily would do. So we're moving at 10 times the speed on decision making, on taking actions. We've stood up whole new factories to make we don't actually make hand sanitizer, or at least we didn't until 2 weeks ago. And we've stood up whole new factories to do that. We're designing right now a hospital in a box so that we can send ready to go containers to parts of the world that need extra hospital capacity, like Africa, to look after our employees. Things that we would have thought would take months, we're finding we can actually do in days. So personal mastery and agility.
So personal mastery and agility, these are key competencies as a leader right now to navigate through these challenging times. I think we're talking about leadership here, but in my opinion, on an individual level, we all have the responsibility to take ownership of the situation. We're all in this together, and there's no hierarchy. So if we're talking about leadership, we're not looking upwards towards the leaders. We all personally need to take action and ownership of the situation and take our social responsibility individually and as part of society. So I'm a true believer of this, and also in the way of how we are dealing in business with our partners, with our co-workers. We need to be collaborative and supportive. And also for IPAs, this is the same. It's all about supporting and providing the best help we can to support our current investors and create a conducive environment for a new reality to attract FDI. So what I would like to continue with now is, based upon the scenario which we have talked about, is what are the fundamentals now to prepare. So we've mapped out a number of fundamental steps which we can take as an investment promotion agency to prepare for a new reality. So we're looking at short-term strategy as well as mid-term strategy, and eventually long-term strategy being a sustainable strategy. But I do believe if we lay down the groundwork now, use the time in this turmoil to review our value proposition and build a strategy around that, that we will be prepared for the next wave of investment. So first of all, we are going to, based upon the new reality or what to anticipate and the now situation, we're going to review our value proposition. So taking into account what are our location benefits, what do we have to offer? This might have shifted, most likely so, due to the current situation. What are the investor needs? So also looking at the existing investors as well as potential investors. What are they looking for? What can we offer? And then also looking at our at the weaknesses of our competing locations. So seeing where we can find a sweet spot for our location to be able to be competitive in. So with regards to sustainability, we can review our value proposition, looking at what contribution can we make to the livable and sustainable development of the region? How can we create green growth and innovation within the sectors which we support and attract? Are there any possible industrial synergies? So looking at circularity. We need to be able to showcase our region's top competencies. Also exploring together with special economic zones, whether we can be a test bed for circularity. So circularity being the waste of the one industrial party or one company being the resource for the other company. So basically bringing CO2 emissions down and being more environmentally friendly. So not only looking at the environment, but also looking at how we can make a social impact, looking at inequalities, looking at how we can support from an educational side, skill and knowledge transfer, local linkages, and generation of quality jobs. So also moving up the value chain, and how we can attract foreign and national investment. So based upon our reviewed value proposition, we're going to develop a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which will have definitely changed, because looking at a SWOT analysis traditionally, taking threats into regard used to be geopolitics, national disasters, increase of labor costs. But right now we're being faced with completely new risks, which we hadn't taken into account in our strategy a few years ago. So first of all, being COVID-19. And second of all, the climate crisis. There's more urgency now to take measures to fight climate change, which is also a real threat. So looking at how we can identify opportunities for investment and also for existing investors. So how can we co-create opportunities together with the existing investors within our jurisdiction? We would like to first share with you a short video on how we can adapt to new patterns of demand. So taking into account supply chains, and I'd like to share with you another short video of Alan Job, CEO of Unilever.
Mr. Job, you lead a major multinational company. You seem to be in as many countries as the United Nations. Over 190 countries, 2.5 billion customers. Describe some of the actions that Unilever is taking to respond to this crisis.
Thanks, Dan. Please call me Alan. Amina, nice to see you again. So first thing I would say is, before we organized our corporate response, I was thrilled at the auto response of our teams on the ground. We were up taking action. Frankly, I know that lots is happening that I don't know about. Our reflex seem to be in the right area. But we believe in a multi-stakeholder business model, and we have tried to organize a multi-stakeholder response to this. And it's in 5 work streams. It's looking after our people, looking after our communities, looking after product supply, adjusting to new patterns of demand, and protecting our cash. Those are the kind of 5 work streams. On the people side of things, of course, the safety of our employees was the first thing we reacted to, changing how people work in factories to socially distance, upgrade hygiene practices, have our office-based workers work from home, and so on. But as part of that, we protected our workforce and our associates from an immediate drop in pay. We've guaranteed no drop in pay for 3 months for any Unilever employee, and that includes people like the cleaners, the cafeteria workers, the security guards, who often don't work for Unilever, they work for third parties, but those ladies and gentlemen are such an important part of our team that we wanted to offer them a sense of security and stability, at least for 3 months. We can afford to do that. We feel we ought to do that. We quickly worked with the WEF and 1 or 2 UN organizations to make a donation of 100 million euros of product so that we can supply things like soap and sanitizers and basic foodstuffs. And I'm delighted we've now got about 15 projects up and running in those parts of the world where that will be most needed. We're working with the UK Department for International Development with another 100 million euro commitment to help in society. Then, of course, keeping our factories running, product supply. When you make food, hand sanitizer, soap, which until we have a vaccine is still the front line of defense, we've had to work very hard with government around the world to correct typically an overreaction to shut everything down and thereby restrict the supply of essential products. And then, the world is changing and we have to adjust to new patterns of demand. As you can imagine, tourists are not buying much of our ice cream right now, but we are enjoying an increase in sales of our soap and products like that. And so our response also requires the agility to adjust our product portfolio. Let me be in no doubt, this is no windfall for Unilever. This is going to be significantly damaging for our business. But we have the product portfolio, the financial strength, and the values system to take this multi-stakeholder response, to protect some of our small suppliers and partners by paying them quickly, to keep them in business. In that regard, I think doing what's right for our business is highly overlapping with doing what's right for society and the world. That's a model we believed in for a while, and it's going to be tested in this crisis.
So as Alan Job mentioned, as companies are doing what is right for society, as IPAs, we need to support the companies in doing right for society. And here we come to an example, a recent example in Costa Rica, which I think is a best practice with regards to identifying opportunities and how you can support as an IPA and what you can do right now in the middle of this crisis. So in Costa Rica, a free trade zones, companies and the public sector have joined forces and created Collab Design Costa Rica, which is an initiative to produce healthcare equipment for COVID-19, including necessities as waterproof gowns, surgical masks, and mechanical ventilators in the fight against COVID. So this is an initiative which really shows agility, which they've really set up very fast, and partnerships and collaborations. And as an IPA, it's crucial here that you play a promotional and facilitator role in enabling these kind of initiatives to take off. So you can either be an initiator as an IPA for these kind of initiatives, or you can act as a facilitator if companies or governments come with these kind of initiatives, or multilateral organizations bringing parties together and facilitating the process, taking away the barriers, perhaps maybe even negotiating financial incentives and doing whatever you can to support these kind of investment projects, which also might be financially very attractive, which will yield financial return in addition to the positive social impact which is being made. So another way to identify opportunities, and this is also looking at the midterm and the long term, because besides doing what we can do now, you also have to strategize for the next wave of investment. You can take into account what is happening. This is from a publication of the UN, what is happening with the SDGs, so how they're being impacted by COVID-19, and what kind of opportunities these bring with them. Because with the impacting of the SDGs, there's also development finance available. So we can look at opportunities within the world of finance, blended finance, targeting impact investors, so private equity, looking at long-term returns instead of short-term ROI, with investment goals focusing on social and environmental impact, leveraging with development finance, and matching them with identified potential investment projects in your jurisdiction. So how can we leverage investment promotion for SDGs? So identify goal-related sectors. So for example, that might be renewable energy, but also looking at connectivity. So maybe even in the fintech space, depending on the conditions within your location. We can select projects and work with governments and partners to build a pipeline. Maybe identify a few projects which we'll actively start promoting, and identifying companies, potential financing partners, and including development finance who will be actively approaching to get involved in these opportunities, which brings us to the last poll. We would like to ask you if you could share with us, do you believe that the SDG-related FDI projects will become the new normal? Yes or no? Very pleased to see that we have almost 85%, between 80 and 85% agreeing that the new normal will be SDG related FDI. Thank you. So Based upon identifying these new opportunities, we need to revisit our marketing and business development strategy. And therefore, we have developed a model taking all these dynamics into account. So sustainable marketing and business development model. First of all, creating internal buy-in by your own organization, and looking at the marketing mix. So what are your products? What are your services? What are the incentives offered? What channels are you going to choose? And what communications are you going to send out? Then we have stakeholder engagement. So developing a strategy, how you're going to solidify existing partnerships, enter into new partnerships. So which new partners are you going to be targeting based upon the new reality? Your relationship with intermediaries, who could also be multipliers, who bring in investors like law firms, accountancy firms, financial institutions, and industry associations. And also, then last but not least, looking at what do you want to see as an outcome from our strategy. So looking, first of all, at financial targets, what's the amount of CAPEX we want to bring into our jurisdiction, how many jobs do we want to create, but also besides from the KPIs set in terms of CAPEX and jobs created, we're also looking at how can we make a social and environmental and a governmental impact. How can we align with the efforts of multilateral organizations, and how can we actually build and increase the brand equity of our investment location. So coming to one of the questions we got from David East, Bureau van Dijk. Thank you very much. I think that was a very relevant question. David East asked us, what are the key services IPA should be offering in the next 6 months? Well, first of all, I think we have to review the current services being offered. I do believe that incentives as well as services are very important, but services are becoming even more important than just incentives alone. So we are looking, first of all, in the short term on how can we support existing investors, so engaging with them, seeing what they need. I think services with regards to health and safety are of the highest priority right now. So what do our current companies need in terms of support with health and safety of their workers, safeguarding their workforce, securing their continuity, productivity, and solidifying supply chains. So having a look how we can help investors, current companies with rebuilding damaged or disrupted supply chains. So it's very much a facilitating role, which we take as an IPA, aligning governments, relief organizations, finance, all stakeholders involved to facilitate the businesses of our investors. So really delving deep into their business case, the challenges faced, and how we can help to make business easier in the short term, and also identify potential partnerships for our investors, also to solidify their position within the ecosystem of our jurisdiction. So updating data, which we can provide to current investors, to potential investors, reviewing our one-stop shop facility if we have one, and maybe considering opening up a one-stop shop service, aligning all stakeholders to facilitate investment. Obviously monitoring updates on incentives which are available, so being proactive in updating investors, providing them with staffing services, also practical solutions, how staff can go to and from work, maybe if public transportation is not an option, like providing a shuttle service, and also training and coaching services, and maybe even a psychological support, coaching on the job, because everyone's under immense stress. So besides that, as an IPA, we need to increase our online presence. So this is a perfect time while we are not traveling around and meeting physically with investors to review our online marketing, our website, our social media channels, engaging with our audience through the social media channels, solidifying our stakeholder relationships, community engagement, and partnerships, and that we can do through video conferencing, getting on the phone. Zoom works beautifully, Skype, WhatsApp. And while we are doing this, we can update our CRM system and identify leads. So preparing the pipeline for the next wave of investment. So this brings us to the Q&A. I'm going to skip this last video due to time constraint. So one of the questions, I've been getting the questions via WhatsApp, so excuse me, I'm on my phone.
Thank you, Ms. Zoe.
Yes.
Yes, right now we will go ahead and take some time for the questions. There are a lot of amazing questions right now in queue. So for whoever who haven't asked questions yet, just a reminder, you can please be sure to type your questions into the question box in your control panel. Now, first question, okay, will be coming from Mr. Ralph. And the question is, what new incentives do IPAs and free zones around the world offer to support current and new investors? Any innovative approaches beside cost reductions and etc.?
Thank you very much, Ralph. Lovely to have you on board. Good question. What new incentives do IPAs and free zones around the world offer? It's still early days, so we are reviewing what is happening. Apart from policy measures being taken, obviously on a national level, policy measures are being taken, which are also being applied by free zones and special economic zones, IPAs. First of all, it's very important that we're taking away the barriers for investment. So less bureaucracy, so easier to set up business, less capital requirements, and also in terms of foreign ownership, we've seen some measures being alleviated there. Dubai has been proactive in that approach. Dubai has changed its free zone policy with regards to attracting new investors. Perhaps we could share this at the end of the presentation. So less capital requirement for setup, ease of setting up in terms of foreign ownership, and also tax relief. So we see in tax incentives being increased in this case, if that answers your question. But I think besides from the policy measures, we also really have to look at services. So we're not just looking at incentives, we're really looking at an active role from the free zone, special economic zone, and the IPA. First of all, those two have to work very closely together. So you have the government level, you have the IPA, and you have the special economic zone who have to really be aligned in all their efforts, taking away any bureaucratic hurdles. And apart from the policy side, very important to be proactive in identifying opportunities for particular investors and existing investors to collaborate with other companies within the ecosystem, solidifying their supply chains, because this is a big challenge right now. Like, how can we rebuild our supply chains, which have been disrupted that answers your question.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Zui. Since we are running out of time, so we will be given the last question for today's webinar. All the other questions, Ms. Zui will give her answer via email. Now, third question will be coming from Mr. Prabhat. Does FDI inflow to real estate industry in Asian emerging countries consider as an opportunity after COVID-19 pandemic, as current prices are lower and potential to be increased in months to come?
Very good question. Was this question specifically asked with regards to Asia? Sorry.
Yes, Asian emerging countries.
Emerging countries. Well, yes, there's definitely opportunities in terms of real estate investment, but we will see a different kind of investments. So also with the changing FDI landscape, we will see a different need, because also with the digital connectivity, there's going to be less demand for physical office space. So people are going to be more flexible working. So there's going to be more demand for flexible co-working spaces. Also with regards to localization, now with the disruption within supply chains, we're going to see more nearshoring and reshoring activities going on, bringing production more on a local and regional level. So we will see an increase in building production facilities locally, and with the production will also come a need for storage facilities. So there we will also see a shift in real estate investment. So there are definitely opportunities there. I always say where there's change, there's opportunity. So you just have to be smart and see where the dynamics are and how you can apply an agile strategy with regards to those opportunities emerging.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Zui. It looks like we've covered all our questions for now. Ms. Zui, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
Well, I wanted to thank everyone for the kind attention and for participating in the polls, and also for their sharp questions. I do not have all the answers, but you're very welcome to send me an email and I will look into it. The situation's changing every day, so I'm very happy to give you my latest update, which I can share with you, and our latest insights. It's not only coming from me, but from my team who I closely work with. And I think what I'd really like to underpin is, most importantly, is take care of your own well-being, take care of the people around you, so your family as well as your co-workers, as well as your clients, your investors, everyone you do business with. We're all in quite a state of insecurity, and I think we all just need to be very supportive, not competitive, but collaborative and supportive, and work closely together, and consider the world and humans as fragile, and how can we best serve them, also just not for short-term financial gain, but how can we make a positive social and environmental impact, but at the same time also looking at viable investment strategies at the same time. So yeah, and let's be smart and adopt agile strategies to prepare for the next wave of investment. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Please stay tuned for AIM Next webinar on the 13th of April. For more details, please visit our website at www.aimcongress.com/webinars. You can also email us your feedbacks on info@aimcongress.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next week.